Welcome to the first of 4 webinars in the Her Life in Politics series. I'm Lauren, I'm from the East End of Glasgow. You can find me on Twitter at Lauren_Bennie UK. We're in for a triple whammy treat tonight. But first, let me just tell you about Elect Her very, very briefly. So Elect Her works to motivate, support and equip women like you in all of our diversity to stand for elected office in all spheres of government. We want to provide you with the knowledge and the confidence and the skills that you need to do that. And we work across all political parties, and we are really committed to creating this safe space for women to explore their futures as leaders, as legislators and champions of political governance, wherever you are in the United Kingdom. I think everyone who joins us tonight can all agree that we are very much all about needing more women in office in every sphere of government across Britain, because we are very much aware that when women have access to political leadership, there are gains for the whole of society, not just for women. So it's really fantastic to be in this space together tonight. And we are just about ready to get started as I see everyone joining in. So I'm Lauren Bennie, I'm your facilitator for tonight. Like I said, I live in the East End of Glasgow, but I'm joining you from a hotel in Covent Garden, which is in London. And that's a very short walk from your future workplace in the Houses of Parliament. So I'm a white woman with long brown hair, and I'm sitting in a hotel room with a white background. So I'm a public affairs specialist by profession. I've served as a civil servant in Westminster in the private office of a cabinet secretary. And for the first 10 years after graduating from Dundee Uni with a politics degree, I went on to advise councillors, cabinet ministers, CEOs, and lots of different topics. I've been working for healthcare charities for the last 4 years, helping them to strengthen their external affairs and stakeholder engagement. And just final word, I am so proud to be a product of Elect Her. So I went to a workshop just like this back in 2017. Monica Lennon, the member of Scottish Parliament, a Labour Party member, was in this space and doing much what we're doing tonight. I went on to be one of the first peer circle cohorts, and 6 months later I was ready to set my parliamentary assessment board. So in 2019, the first opportunity to run came at the snap general election, and that was for Glasgow North East. And that was the same general election that both Wendy and Amy were successfully elected in. And so that leads us very nicely into welcoming our panelists and just allowing me to just gently remind everyone about our Elect Her values. So this is a space for women to feel welcome in. It's cross-party, and while we all have different views, we'll seek to encourage one another, and if we do disagree with each other, we'll do that with respect. I'd like to just introduce our panelists for tonight. We have Amy Callaghan, Member of Parliament, Anum Qaisar, Member of Parliament, and we have Wendy Chamberlain, Member of Parliament. So welcome to our space tonight. You can see they're all on camera, and we're going to do further introductions in each of our sessions. So very briefly, Amy, Anum and Wendy are here to tell us something about their journey into politics and also their experiences as members of Parliament with constituencies in Scotland. So so we've got 3 MPs, 2 political parties. It's quite a squad of us in this room tonight. It's a sisterhood, and we're going to be hearing from Amy, Anum and Wendy in turn, in that order, for approximately 15 minutes each. We'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll open up to a panel discussion in the last 30 minutes. And we are going to, start with Amy, if I may. So Amy, Hello, nice to see you and meet you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, I will say very briefly that you're the MP for East and Bartonshire, and you were elected in 2019, and you were actually only one of 21 MPs under 30 at that time as well, so quite a feat.
Sadly, not anymore.
You studied politics at Strathclyde in Glasgow, and you also worked for two members of Scottish Parliament before you kind of got to where you are today. Quite a varied past as well in terms of your kind of professional experience. You've worked in bars and hospitality. You brought that in more recently to your MP role, and you were a carer as well. We know that as a teenager you were diagnosed with cancer, and more recently you've been recovering from a brain hemorrhage, and there's absolutely no doubt that your lived and work experience is kind of shaping your political interest and has done for quite some time. And that's given you that focus on children and young people and those with cancer too. So I'd love to kind of just open up the floor to hear more about your story, what the work you're doing, and a bit more about your background, if I can hand over to you.
Yeah, I don't want to talk for too long. I'm quite interested to respond to questions, but I think probably kind of setting out why I got into politics is probably quite a useful start point. I was at university, like you said, studying politics with the intention of becoming a modern studies teacher when I got diagnosed with melanoma at 19, and basically saw the inequality that existed around me. And I was in quite a privileged position to be able to have my parents and my family alongside me. And we know that family support aids recovery, especially from illnesses like cancer. So I was in the position to have them alongside me and recovered quite well and quite quickly. But I was in a ward where people, and young people in particular, did not have that kind of family support, especially from rural Scotland, who had travelled down to the Central Belt for treatment. And I thought, this is just so grossly unfair, and something needs to change, something's got to give. And I think change comes from within, as I'm sure all of us will agree. And it was basically at that point that I thought, I need to get better, and I need to be this change and to make this happen. So that was basically when I decided to become a politician. But naturally, you can make that decision for yourself, but you need people to believe in you as well and to vote for you. So stood for election and was very, very lucky to get elected first time round. I know that doesn't happen to many people, but yeah. So we're here, and within the first year and a half of being elected, there's now something called a Young Patient Family Fund in Scotland, which I proposed to my party for their 2021 manifesto. And it's now implemented, which means that any young person undergoing significant treatment in hospital can get access for their family, for their siblings, and for their parents to get hotel accommodation and sustenance paid for. That's a Scottish Government fund. So you can have an idea, get into politics, and actually make that change happen. So yeah, it's actually a really, really positive thing that you can do.
So it's really, it's become a bit of a cliche in terms, but being the change is absolutely how you describe that. You know, you saw something that really needed to be changed. You felt there was an injustice there, and that not every voice was being heard. And that kind of motivated you to stand for election, to kind of raise all the voices in the room, really.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, the system still isn't perfect. There's still a lot of changes we can make to it, but I think me being elected and making these changes has progressed things further. And I think we can all find what we want to change and find what change we want to be, and we can do that.
So thinking back to that early success of being elected first time round, can you rewind a little bit in terms of could you talk about any barriers that you may have faced in that sort of earlier period? So in that kind of road leading up to selection and gaining the experience that you felt you needed to stand for office?
For me, there wasn't many challenges in gaining the selection. I think I stood against the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, and I think when I put myself forward, it was kind of agreed that a young woman standing would probably be a suitable candidate for standing against a woman as well. So I didn't face any challenges in my selection, so that was great. The challenges came afterwards when just misogynistic attitudes and very difficult kind of comments came about. I was asked if I'd ever had an abortion coming out my campaign hub one day.
Wow.
You're faced with very, very difficult situations like that certainly mean questions that no man would ever be asked. Was asked if I was going to have children, who would look after my children, as if I've not got a partner who could, take part in that process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of support system did you put in place to help overcome some of those sort of barriers? I mean, and obviously difficult to kind of describe that, and especially with misogynistic behaviour, because that's systematic change that's required. But was there anything closer to home that helped in your support mechanisms?
I think talking about it helped, to be honest with you, and speaking about it, one with my campaign team and two with my partner and my family at home helped, and actually just discussing it and calling it out. I call out some behaviours on social media still, but I don't like to add too much fuel to the fire, because I think a lot of trolls or people like when you call them out, because then they're getting recognition for their bad behaviour and their poor behaviour. So I don't like to add too much. I used to be kind of what I would refer to as sassy on Twitter, and kind of do like the sort of painted nails emoji and like quote tweet things if people were being kind of nasty online. But now I try not to do that, because it just gives them attention, and I think people kind of like that, and it gives them oxygen. So I try not to do that anymore, even though sometimes I type it up and then I'm like, just don't hit send, because they don't need that.
Yeah, like limit the oxygen, limit the air when you're
just
engaging.
deny it oxygen, just let it like fizzle out and die. Doesn't need any more tension than it's already got.
That's really good advice. Can we talk a bit more about what your role involves? Because I know that there's a great way to kind of catch up on what you're doing in some of your TikTok videos and the way that you communicate. But can you kind of tell us about what a day in the life of being a member of Parliament is like for you?
Yes, I was telling you, obviously, when we first logged in, I was doing the sort of day in your life TikTok trend yesterday, which didn't go down very well because it was too busy a day and I completely forgot all about it. And then I got back to my hotel room last night, sitting eating curly fries, and I've filmed like what was my entire day, essentially, just sitting munching some curly fries. So I need to basically get better at filming it, but there is no typical day, I wouldn't say. I think it varies quite considerably, just depending on what the business of the day in Parliament is. You can plan your day out and then it just all gets kind of destroyed, depending on, like yesterday, for example, I had quite a quiet day in my diary, and then the government pulled the evening's business. So it could have actually had been a busy day in my diary and I could have got lots done, but instead it ended up being quite a wasted and frustrating day. So, but naturally, if my diary had been really busy, they would have added in a couple of other things, and a few other additional urgent questions and statements would have gotten taken. That just seems to be how things work in this place. I would say constituency days are a bit more a bit more scheduled, but certainly in here it's quite hard because it's not on your time scale.
So let's talk about your constituency days then, because I think that's a really good way of kind of helping women in our space kind of understand kind of some of that time commitment that places you in Westminster, and there's time when you're kind of placed in your constituency. And I know Anum had 15 surgeries over the summer. There's a lot that you've been getting on with. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that sort of split and maybe what you do in constituency and how often you are in constituency?
She bet me I only had 10. I had some virtual ones as well though, but only 10 like in-person ones. Of course she had to put that in, didn't she? Yeah, I think so. If you're doing it just depends how like much time you're spending down here. So this week, for instance, we're down till Thursday, and then it just depends, because the government have obviously got a big statement on, or we're expecting a big statement on energy coming on Thursday. So there's constituency day on Friday, and I'm doing a constituency events on Saturday, taking Sunday to have a family day. Well, I'm renovating my house just now, so I'm doing stuff in my house. I'm saying a family day, I'm doing things in my house on Sunday, and then back to Westminster on Monday.
So
but then summer recess is great because you get a lot more time to kind of plan a lot more events, and you're not saying no to things.
Yeah, and obviously, I want to just highlight a question I'm not going to expect you to answer, because it's something that is kind of surrounded in bias, but often women members of parliament are asked, how do you balance the work-life balance and the family life? And it's just a question that's not asked of male members of parliament, so I'm not going to ask it here tonight, but I just wanted to kind of note it as something that does happen, that you've touched on as well. What's it like being in a constituency surgery when you might not know the kind of 10 different topics that your constituency members are going to kind of bring to you? How do you handle that?
I love surgeries. I think that's the exciting part of it, is you never know whether someone's going to walk in and ask you about a council related issue, like because their bins hasn't been emptied, or if they're going to ask you a really, really deep and interesting question that's fully reserved about a relative that's stranded abroad, or something that you can really sink your teeth into, or whether it's going to be devolved for us. So there's a whole sort of host of different things that they can come in with, but I like that it just kind of to's and fro's between various different things, and you could literally get asked anything. I find that quite interesting.
It's definitely something about kind of learning a huge amount of information as well, and understanding your party's position as well as kind of the government's position and the opposing position as well. There's a lot to take on there, and you all seem to take it in your stride, particularly with those sort of short and last minute changes. Melissa has asked a question about, what do you think a candidate must have on their CV? And did you get involved in the wider party politics outside of politics before selection? To know that you took jobs with parliamentarians, you've got experience in that. But what do you think a candidate should have on their CV when they're kind of seeking to be selected by their party?
I don't think anyone, well, certainly like your local party isn't going to ask for your CV. They didn't for me. I don't think that's particularly relevant. I think you just need to be charismatic and interesting and be able to deliver for your constituents. I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, she's done this professionally and this and this and this, and she's delivered X amount of leaflets. But I think, be committed and dedicated to your party, be committed and dedicated to your constituency. Don't be a carpetbagger.
And what do you mean by that?
Like someone who gets someone that gets shipped into their constituency from elsewhere.
Yeah, so you're the kind of the preference for you and your politics is about being in that local space. So perhaps standing in the constituency or the area that you live in, that you've got lived experience in as well. Yeah,
or that you have a very strong tie to. I think that's really important, that you've got at least something really tangible, that you're not just kind of popping in. I think that's quite important.
Yeah. So that's interesting to hear from your kind of party's perspective about that. Less about a CV, more about your experience.
That's very much my perspective. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think depending on when you're elected and in what party, there's lots of different processes, and we certainly have resources on our website of kind of the different opportunities, and certainly in there is also things called political CVs, so they don't even look like regular CVs, so that's something that people might want to explore as well, and that's where you would be asked about your experiences in your local community. So exactly as Amy's talked about, what your local connections are to a particular seat that you're interested in as well. So
can I just come in for a second? So I just realised I didn't do my visual description.
Go for it.
So I'm a 30-year-old blonde woman in a whitish, off-white room with a large window in the background which overlooks the London Eye and Westminster Bridge. I'm wearing a bright pink jacket with a white top underneath and a gold necklace. I also wear glasses too.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for doing that, Amy. So I've got quite an extensive comment in here, so I'm just quickly going to glance at our chat box. It's from Ailey in the south side of Glasgow. And at the moment, very much, I feel very much a parent, having had our second baby in January, and I identify as disabled and neurodiverse woman. Ailey is also a health improvement manager for Inclusion Health for Public Health Scotland, and has worked in disability rights in the civil service and third sector. Similar to Amy, I can see the change that needs to happen, and she's on Instagram and is building a more public profile. There's not so much a question there, but I would definitely say, what advice would you give to any woman kind of thinking of standing, regardless of their home life situation?
So I would probably pick up on the disabled point there. When I stood for election, I didn't have a physical disability, but I do now. And I would certainly still encourage people to stand for election. I think we need more women, we need more disabled voices, we need more voices of marginalised groups in politics, certainly. I will just say there are certain challenges that are very, very difficult to overcome, even if you're in a building that legislates for equalities. I feel like all I do is fight for myself, even when I'm here. I fight for my constituents, but I have to fight for myself as well. And it gets very frustrating and very challenging at times. Sometimes I just wish life would be a little bit easier, but that's not what it's about. It's about standing up for ourselves. So I would never discourage anyone to stand. I think you'll find that people appreciate it. I came back after having my brain hemorrhage physically to the House of Commons in February, and asked a question about a friend that I met when I was in rehab, about her stroke and the disability benefits that she hasn't been receiving, or how it's not enough for her to survive on. And the amount of stroke survivors that have got in touch with me who all have physical disabilities as well, and it's ongoing since, and it means so much to people. So you can really represent a community and really represent different groups if you make your experiences clear and known. And I think shying away from that can be a disadvantage instead of advantageous to you.
And I just want to run over by just a minute or two in this section, Amy, because I just think this is a really important conversation topic, and Ailey's followed up just about, and she's going to ask some more questions in the Q&A section as well, but she'd love to know how it's been after your disability and the need for you to be in Westminster all the time. And I wonder whether you might be able to touch on just there about some of the issues you had around kind of proxy voting as well, and the fact that you had to make a really arduous, like a really challenging journey down to the House of Commons to make a speech, and I think that's worth just kind of touching on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting / difficult point, because it's an ongoing frustration. It's an ongoing frustration because I want nothing more than to represent my constituents, and to do so currently I have to be here. And given that during the pandemic we were able to vote with the touch of a button, and we were able to vote by proxy, if they could turn that back on to allow people with my kind of health condition and my kind of situation to continue to do so, it would be very helpful. But they've chosen not to do so because this place is incredibly archaic and doesn't want to progress. But where we are just now, and it's actually really useful that we're having this conversation just now, is that if the business of the House continues and remains as is, which is somewhat doubtful, to be fair, given the kind of current political climate, next Wednesday evening there should be a vote on proxy voting for medical conditions, which would allow me a little bit more, allow me and other people with health conditions a little bit more flexibility, just in terms of, for instance, this statement on Thursday. I was supposed to have a hospital appointment that's actually really important, and I've been waiting months for it. Yeah. And I've now had to reschedule it because there's a statement here. And it's all this kind of ongoing frustration that is causing a number of issues, and that's why it's actually quite useful over summer recess. I just piled in hospital appointment after hospital appointment to make sure that I got them all over and done with. but there's always one that just slips through the net. So yeah, I mean, there is hopefully some sort of way forward, but with the government in kind of chaos and at a standstill over summer, it's a bit difficult at the moment.
Thank you so much for that really personal insight. And I think given what's in the chat as well, I think when we get to our kind of panel session as well, have a look in there, and then we'll come back to some of the questions from Scarlett and others as we open up our panel discussion as well. Really, really helpful. And thank you everyone for your reactions too. So thank you, Amy, for now. We are going to bring in Anum Qaisar, who is the Scottish National Party Member of Parliament for Airdrie and Shotts. You'll be able to see her in the full screen now in the Houses of Parliament's library. We haven't spotted a librarian yet or a shush sign, so we're all good. Thank you so much for joining us. I just kind of very quickly want to kind of just set a little bit of context. You were elected for Airdrie and Shotts in 2021. And the second Scottish Muslim woman elected. You were elected in a by-election, so slightly different, and that was as a result of one of your colleagues in the Scottish National Party running for the Scottish Parliament, and then that meant that the Member of Parliament seat for Airdrie and Shotts was to be contested in a by-election. You worked as a modern studies teacher before you got into Parliament, and like Amy, you've also worked for parliamentarians as well before you reskilled in the teaching profession. And I'm really pleased to see that you also sit on the Women and Equalities Committee. We might touch on that if you're able to. And like Wendy and Amy, there are also, there's memberships that you hold with the all-party parliamentary groups too. So I'd love to just open up the floor and hear more from you, Anum, about your journey into politics, who you are, and if you can give a visual description of yourself too, that'd be really great for all of our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So my name's Anum Qaisar and I am the Member of Parliament for Airdrie and Shotts. I am, for the next 5 days, a 29-year-old. I'm going to be 30 on Sunday. I'm quite sad about that. I am a young woman of colour, so I come from a Pakistani heritage. I have short black hair and I am currently in the House of Commons library. So just behind me are lots of old books. So I firmly believe that you cannot be what you cannot see. And when I was a wee girl growing up in Scotland, I never thought myself as any different to my pals. I thought we were all the same until the 11th of September, which is the 9/11, but also my birthday. I went to school the next day, got asked if I was a terrorist, if my family were terrorists, if my family... I was told that my skin was the same colour as poo, and I found that really, really challenging. My parents told me to question it and challenge it, but as a 9-year-old, I found that really difficult and I felt like I couldn't. A couple of years later, or around about that time, I then was watching TV. One day I was watching BBC News and I saw Saida Warsi, so Baroness Warsi, on television. She was getting promoted to UK government and she was the first Muslim woman to enter government. And I remember thinking, wait, she looks like me. And even at that point, I wasn't entirely, aware of what political party I wanted to join. I came from a Labour background and just naturally went on to that course before I joined the SNP. But I think that was really, really important for me, that I was able to see on TV that someone looked like me, because before then I'd only ever seen predominantly white men or white women, and I'd never thought that something like politics would be for something like me. And I think that story is really important. And if you're aware of politics, Saida Warsi is a Tory peer. Her and my politics don't align on a lot of things. But what we can agree is that image is so powerful. Lauren was correct in her introduction that I'm the second Muslim woman to be elected to the House of Commons from Scotland. but at this point, out of the 59 seats, I'm the only person of colour. So out of 59 seats, there's only 58 are all occupied by white people. And so it is so important, and that's why I support organisations like Elect Her, because I don't want to be the only woman doing this, and I don't want to get into politics or independence and stuff, but for however long I'm here, I don't want to be the only woman doing this as a woman of colour. It's a lot on my shoulders, and I don't want to be the only person here. I think it's so important that I bring along other people from marginalised communities to be representing folk here in Parliament. So I don't want to talk for too long. That's really a whistle-stop tour. I got elected in politics after the 9/11. A couple of years later, I wrote to Tony Blair about the Iraq War. And then, as Lauren said, I worked for parliamentarians. I actually got sick of politics. So then retrained as a teacher, but then got the opportunity to stand in air train shots and went through selection and then got elected. And even on the ballot paper in May 2021, I was the only woman out of 8. I was the only woman on the ballot paper. And then naturally, and I mean, this is just a given, I was the only person of colour on the ballot paper as well.
Quite an experience to go through, especially, I mean, if you don't mind me saying, like, as a younger person coming through that process, because let's face it, there's really not many kind of younger women kind of heading through that. And I think that's something that your party does very well in terms of kind of pulling all kind of people from all backgrounds together. I had kind of picked up in some of your TikToks that the war in Iraq was a kind of catalyst, but really quite moving and impactful to hear the challenges that you faced as a child, so I really appreciate you sharing that with us, because it is really our background beliefs and how we are affected as we grow up that kind of shapes us as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about maybe the difference, if you know, about being a by-election candidate. Was it quite a quick process? It happened, and you were also there was kind of almost like a second campaign after all of the general election, and you were still kind of fighting for your votes and your voice to get people out to vote. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, coming through a by-election is incredibly challenging, whether that's before or even afterwards. Beforehand, the biggest challenge I faced was that my election was pretty much simultaneously running my campaign simultaneously alongside Scottish Parliament elections. So ensuring that people understood the two differences between members of Parliament and members of the Scottish Parliament, and then explaining to people, yeah, I know that you voted last week, but actually we really want you to come out again exactly a week later to come out and vote. Afterwards, I've been really lucky that I am in a place where I've got a lot of support, not actually just by my own party, and I think this is really important to talk about, is people maybe don't realise the extent of cross-party support. And even after my election, actually some of the best pieces of advice were given to me by Tory MPs, and you wouldn't think that, but actually, because there's only 650 of us, we all know what we're experiencing. And so once I was here afterwards, I've been very lucky to have that great support network. And even though Amy was slagging me off beforehand, I've had a lot of support from people like her.
Fab. So can I take a little sidestep to finance? Because Tara asked a question about what you might suggest in terms of researching the costs and benefits of making a genuine impact and as a career in politics. I've interpreted that question in another way, which I'm going to ask for first before we dip into that. But it can be expensive to be a candidate, and I know that you're in a crowdfunder, which is maybe not something people think about to be able to support the election campaign. And were there any other avenues of support that you could suggest that people can tap into?
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely say to anyone that's interested in this, that shouldn't be a worry for you, and please don't. It's slightly different if you're running as an independent candidate opposed to as part of a political party. But most political parties will have branches, and those branches do fundraising and will have a pot of money there. And then, as you said, Lauren, I had a crowdfunder. That was mostly because our finances were going split two ways, one to the MSP candidate and then some to myself. So we both ran crowdfunders just to get that extra bit of money. But in the first instance, if you're running as on a party ticket, that's something that the party local branch should be organising. And every single year, political parties have fundraisers. So we just had a fundraiser actually a couple of months ago. So yeah, political parties usually just take that step, and I would really encourage women, if it's something that you're genuinely interested in, please don't have finances as a top of your worry in terms of running the election campaign.
Great. And were there any other were there any particular barriers that you did face, and how you kind of overcame them as you were kind of running? And that might be, I might just ask that selection. I might actually just ask that in the way that Amy kind of responded as well, about maybe some of the barriers that you'd face once you were elected as well.
Yeah, I mean, I am very proud of my background. I refer to myself as a Scottish Pakistani Muslim, and I wear that with a badge of honour. The reality is, however, some people will use my identity or my religion or the way I look against me. And I'm very often just pitted off as a wee girl who doesn't really know much. I am currently wearing heels, I wear eyelashes. I don't really care. That's the way I want to dress. And I don't think it changes me or changes my ability to stand up and speak on behalf of my constituents. And it's always really interesting how many comments I get in regards to that. I put up I laugh because I'm just so used to it now, but I put up a picture the other week on Twitter and someone commented that you've got turkey teeth. And I was like, actually, I just have a really good brushing routine every morning and evening. But so that can be quite frustrating, is the pure sexism, misogyny, and then the racism. And I mean, everything's intersectional because I'm a woman of colour and I'm young.
Yeah. Dr. Araba asks about what the best bit of being an MP is.
I mean, standing up for my constituency, when I stand up in the chamber, and it's not just even asking a question, but it's asking a question that a constituent has specifically asked me to ask. I always find that really powerful. And then, as Amy said, constituency surgeries. So that is probably my favourite part. My favourite surgeries are always in supermarkets, because you'll have my big banner up and folk just come up and, oh, hi, Hen, how you doing? You know what Scottish people are like, we're just so friendly, and we'll just come and have a wee chat. And I mean, yeah, they can ask you anything about bins to home office stuff. So
interesting. Yeah, it's like Amy says, like you can kind of really be ready for anything. Good tip there as well. Surgeries in supermarkets. Good tip there. Yeah. Ailey asked about sorry, my WhatsApp screen's just jumped. That she maybe picking up on what you can say about your experiences, but she's a bit scared of everything that's kind of on the internet and kind of the attacks against women and how hard that is to manage. She mentions hate mail about through the post, and is it really like that? And does the party or the parliamentary estate support you with managing that?
Yeah, I mean, the social media trolls are awful, and I think you can either do two things, like as Amy was saying, you just ignore them or you challenge them. I frankly don't have enough time in the day to challenge every single person that says something. The way I look at it is very matter of fact. I look at it and think, first of all, do they live in my constituency? Are they one of my constituents? Because if they're not, then they're just sprouting out hate for the sake of it. And if it is one of my constituents, and if they've got a genuine concern, my contact details are readily available online. I'm just not going to engage on social media in that sense. They can email my office, they can call my office, and they can get an answer that way. Sometimes, however, I do feel the need to say something back. And again, that just goes back to the idea that I see myself as I just see if there's a young girl, the way I always look at it, if there's a young woman of colour who's looking at my social media, I want her to see that I'm able to call it out.
Yeah.
And I'm not calling it out just for myself, I'm calling it out on behalf of her, because I would argue that racism and Islamophobia has changed over the years. In my day, when I was younger, it was commonplace to be called the P word. I don't think that's as common anymore. I think it can be a wee bit more subtle or hinted, or it's like, do you actually belong here, or what are you doing there? And I think it's really important that people I can have that balance of not engaging with them, but also calling it out, so other people can see that I call it out and that they should be brave enough to do so as well. Sorry, I think I rambled. But
no, I mean, that it really comes across about it's important for you to role model and show, creating that space and encouraging other women coming through to see that it is possible to kind of challenge some of that behaviour. So I think, you know, for the role models that you've seen and the role model you're becoming is really important for us as women who are kind of going through those processes. Final question from the chat box for you. We'd love to know why you decided to get into Westminster politics rather than Scottish politics. And I think they're probably both intertwined for you, but what was why did you decide to go for Westminster politics?
Well, this is me getting political. I believe in Scottish independence, and I would like to see myself or me and colleagues who are young women taking that role in Westminster and shouting about why we believe what we believe. I think for far too long, especially in Westminster, we've had a culture of older, white, middle-aged men taking the role, even up in Scotland, whether it was the SNP or any other parties. And so right now, I think there's me, there's Amy, there's Mary Black, there's a couple of, their names have escaped me. I think Angela's young enough to pass as a young woman. So there's quite a few of us. Amy, don't tell her I said that. This is not...
It's being recorded.
Right, okay, I'm going to pretend I never said that.
I'm 100% screen grabbing that wee bit and sending it to her.
Transcription.
You, I could have faith in you, thank you so much. But I think there's quite a few of us, and I think that's really important, that kind of mixing it up. I know that sounds quite basic, but essentially that's what it is. And sorry, I did see that there was another question about religion, and I just wanted to touch on that. So someone said, I don't think religion has anything to do with it, and I don't know other MPs' beliefs. I disagree. I think it's really important. We know that Muslim women are some of the most marginalised in society. Islamophobia is on the rise. In Scotland as well, we've seen academic research show that Islamophobia is on the rise. You'd think that, you know, years on from 9/11 that would have changed, but sadly it's not. And I firmly believe that as a Muslim woman, if I am comfortable enough to talk about my religion openly and say that I'm a Muslim woman, but I deserve a place at the table, then that's really important. But of course, the caveat to that is that I'm not identifiably Muslim because I don't wear the hijab. And so in Parliament right now, we only have one hijab wearing MP. And as far as I'm aware, in the Scottish Parliament, there's no one. And I think that's really powerful.
Anum Qaisar, thank you so much for a whistle-stop tour of your journey, and for me certainly first time we've been able to touch on some of those points, so really fantastic. Let me introduce Wendy. Thank you so much for joining us, Wendy, for patiently waiting for us. You're the Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament for North East Fife, and you were elected in 2019. I'm really interested in your role as Chief Whip for the Liberal Democrats, because that's a role that's rarely been held by females across all parties, if I can add that, and we might go into that in more detail about why that is, and how you find that role. And I believe you also speak for your party on work and pensions. So in terms of your kind of really varied background, you studied English at university, and you joined the police force, and you worked in that space both operationally and in staff support and development. So lots more to learn there too, and I guess applying that to your role as a member of parliament as well. You've worked for the Ministry of Defence and a global drinks manufacturer too. An interesting fact, you were the first female board member for the governing body for Shinty. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, the Camanachd Association. So for those who are not aware what Shinty is, it's the Scottish equivalent of Irish hurling. Not a bad thing for a chief whip to do, be seen running about with a big stick.
Thank you so much for pronouncing that, so that I didn't have to. It was strategically structured that way. So can I ask you to kind of introduce yourself and to give us a visual introduction to yourself, and just tell us a little bit more about where you're at and kind of work that you do?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Lauren. And thanks to Kate and Teresa for your BSL interpretation. I'm Wendy Chamberlain. I'm a mid-40s woman. I left 30 behind me a long time ago with long, dark, curly hair and dark eyes. I'm wearing a leopard print dress, and I've got a completely white background behind me. It's lovely to be here tonight. So I've probably taken a little bit different. I suppose one of the questions earlier was about older women. So I was a police officer for 12 years, and you may or may not be aware, but the Representation of the People Act is it makes it quite difficult for somebody in a role as a police officer to be involved in politics. So although I was always interested in politics, did modern studies at school, have always been politically engaged, I probably didn't do much until when I left the police in 2011. I did think about getting more involved at that time, but decided not to. And then I always joke that the next thing was that I was 2015 general election, and I was crying at Nick Clegg on the telly when, following the coalition government, the Liberal Democrats went from 56 to 8 MPs, and felt that, you know, there was this point where I could no longer just vote for the party that I supported. I needed to do a bit more. So I joined the party, and I think the real change for me came in 2017 when the snap general election was called, in that I was an activist. You know, I knocked doors, I delivered leaflets. I was involved a little in that I was a council candidate in my local area, but the 2017 general election, North East Fife, had been held by the Liberal Democrats between 1987 and 2015, and was an all-women shortlist. And I was contacted by the then leader of the Scottish Party, Willie Rennie, MSP, and said, I think you would be a really good candidate. And it probably won't surprise you all to hear that I laughed, in that, you know, me, really? Never thought of myself in that way. But really, for all that I eventually was not selected under an all-women shortlist, there's no doubt that potentially would Willie have reached out to me. I'd like to think he would have. I jokingly call him my work husband now that he is the constituency MSP for the same area that I represent. But perhaps not. You know, it certainly encouraged to look more widely. And then I was a paper candidate then in 2017 when I wasn't successful in the North East Fife selection. So I did stand for Parliament once before I was elected in 2019. And I suppose how I would approach it is, I describe being an MP, and maybe this is because I've previously worked in learning and development, that there's like a Venn diagram, and it's skills to be a candidate, skills to be a people manager, because actually my top tip for being a really good MP is to have a fantastic team behind you, because basically they make you look good, and manage those diary conflicts that Amy was talking about earlier. And then the skills to be an MP, and actually that legislative role, that candidate role, that people manager role. My attempt over my time in Parliament is to move those circles as much into the centre as possible, and hit the sweet point. So yeah, I can't quite believe that I'm approaching my 3rd anniversary of being elected. It has been, in some respects, particularly when we look back to COVID, really challenging and feels like never ending. And then on the other hand, absolutely, that 3 years has totally changed. And a good example of that is my children. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. And just to see the difference in them in the last 3 years, I think really illustrates where I am now. Conscious not to talk too much, because I know you want to ask me questions.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Yeah, and I think actually Tara Shahid had asked a question, and they've qualified it a little bit further. And I think actually your introduction has touched on a lot of those points. And Tara was asking about kind of the reality of trying to get involved in politics mid-career. I think maybe kind of reflecting on kind of Amy and Anum both going to university and starting kind of earlier. But I think you've explained there about a different pathway into politics and how it's possible to, and maybe that's something you can expand on as we kind of go through our sort of other questions. One of the questions about your role is day-to-day role. What does that look like for you?
So it's a bit different for me as chief whip, because obviously those sort of days that change at the drop of a hat that Amy described, I need to be there in Westminster to sort of work out what we're doing. So as well as my, so as an MP, I have my staff structures. I have a researcher in London, and then I have my team in the constituency, but also I manage a team of 5 in Westminster as well as chief whip. So I've got those two, populations of teams of people to manage. So I'm generally in Westminster from a Monday lunchtime right through till Thursday afternoon. And hopefully, if I'm really lucky, I get the 4 o'clock from London on a Thursday, which is the Aberdeen LNER train, which means I can get off in Fife as opposed to changing at Waverley, or indeed pleading with my husband to come and collect me, which happens sometimes.
So how often do you go down to Westminster compared to kind of being at home in your constituency? And I wonder whether you can maybe talk about kind of those kind of recess periods as well.
Yeah, so basically I'm generally in Westminster when Parliament is sitting. So we've just returned this week from a 6-week recess, which is aligned more with the English school holidays. Though in some respects we get it back slightly in October, because the October conference recess covers the Scottish school holidays a bit, but doesn't cover the English half term. But other than that, my constituency days then are a Friday, and a Saturday, and I try and keep Sunday as a family day. But if any of you on the call with teenagers, and I am getting to the stage where there's a reason why I have a dog, so somebody's pleased to see
me. Very good. Jen, thank you for your question about the different journeys and cross-party support. We'll ask that in our panel. We've got Amy and Wendy together, both from 2 different parties, but work together as well. Amy and Anum are on TikTok, just one social media platform of many. And one of the questions that came in from Tara was about, is it possible to avoid social media? Could it harm your kind of political career if you do avoid it? I mean, there's probably an argument to say it can also harm your career if you're on it.
Yeah, I think the reality is the nature of our politics now means that it's probably impossible to stay off it entirely. I'm not on TikTok. I've been on a couple of videos with teenagers just because, it was lockdown and needs must. But I suppose there's just that bit for me of, there's a bit of about being authentic, and I think it's absolutely right for Amy and Anum to be there, but probably
stay away from TikTok, Wendy. It consumes your life.
Possibly not for me. But I think the other thing is to be really realistic about, at the end of the day, we focus on our constituents, all of us, because we care about our constituents, and I'm sure all of us get involved in politics because we wanted to make a difference, even if our political values might not align. And actually, the majority of your constituents aren't on social media. What's more important that you're out and about in your constituency, in your community, and you're speaking to people. Interestingly for me, when I'm knocking on doors, the thing that people have picked up on is usually local and regional news. So they've seen me on STV, or they've seen me on BBC Scotland, or they've heard me on TFM or Kingdom FM. And actually that's the bit that demonstrates to your constituents what you're doing and what you're busy with.
And it's that local element that you've just described that really does burst that, what we call the Westminster bubble. Sometimes in a vacuum with people who may not be your constituents, but with loud enough voices, and you're actually looking to engage using different forms of communication in your local community. And
by the same token, also just kind of be yourself sometimes. Obviously in my visual description, I said I had long, dark, curly hair. I've been quite fortunate with the trolls in that I haven't had too much touch wood but you know, I have on occasion been compared to Brian May from Queen, and there's a meme of Brian blowing a kiss. So I post that, you know, because it's important that you kind of don't take yourself too seriously.
What a way to respond to that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to ask Dr. Araba's question again as well to you. What's the best bit about being an MP?
It is definitely those constituency wins. And I can think about a couple where, you know, we were in tears in the office because we had got an immigration or something sorted. But I genuinely say to people, and I mean this is the best job I've ever had. It is a complete privilege, you know, to represent people no matter in what place you do it, whether that be a council chamber, the Scottish Parliament, the Senate, or Westminster, and the opportunities that you have to speak up for your constituents, but just to be exposed to things. I actually met Brian May. I mean, it was pretty cool. So yeah, it's a huge privilege.
Was it by any chance on environmental issues about saving badgers?
It was indeed, absolutely. We shared hair care tips.
He was outside my office in Smith Square for one of those protests many years ago. Kirsten was asking about the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome when you settled into Westminster Parliament. So you're 3 years in. Can you recall what that challenge has been, or maybe it's changed? There's new challenges in terms of heading back to Westminster. I
mean, COVID. I just you can't get away from that. You know, I was elected, and I remember feeling a sense of guilt as COVID started to take hold, and we were, you know, Parliament was shut down, and because I felt that obviously I had defeated a sitting MP, and I felt and was literally handing my new caseworker. I remember I handed my new caseworker a laptop, and it was a case of see you online, and I felt a sense of guilt that potentially if the sitting MP had remained the MP, would they be able to give a better service because they had an established team in place, because the volume at that stage was just really quite incredible. And you know, there is, everybody says what's normal as an MP, and you know, I don't know what normal looks like, frankly. And you know, on a cross-party basis, I've signed Amy's letters in relation to accessibility. It's a step forward that we have proxy voting for paternity, parental leave, maternity leave, but the fact that people like Amy are, you know, who have complex health needs are required to come to this place to vote. There's absolutely no doubt as well, though, that being on Zoom, as we were during COVID, with not only our colleagues, but cross-party colleagues, there is no doubt that being in Westminster, you get the opportunity to build those relationships, particularly when, you know, election campaigns are quite intense. So how do we find the right balance that ensures that we get the right people to represent us in politics? It's never ending, but I think having more women of colour, disabilities, etc., will help us do that.
And can I just add something to that really quickly? Sorry.
Please, Amy, please do. Yeah.
I think it's really refreshing to hear what Wendy just said there, and something we probably not discussed as a sort of new sort of 2019 intake often enough. I think that guilt was really real when the pandemic hit and we went into a lockdown and we hadn't fully established our offices yet. It was an incredibly challenging time, not feeling like you were maybe in the best position to fully represent your constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, you know, there's an MP's hotline for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, people stuck abroad, because as the lockdown started to happen on a global basis, and they were so overwhelmed that literally you were phoning the Foreign and Commonwealth hotline. I say Foreign and Commonwealth because that's what it was called then, and it was literally like, so what's their name, what's their home address, what's their passport number, and basically the advice you were given was tell them to send an email to this address and tell them to follow the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in that country on social media so they see updates. And then you're going back to people and they're like, you're my MP, you're supposed to be able to, you know, I was expecting getting in touch with you that you would actually be able to do something.
Anyone would be able to figure that out.
Yeah, it was really, really difficult. And again, back to amazing, you know, colleagues in terms of my team, you know, what they did and how they managed it. you know, it's not a 9-to-5 job for caseworkers, office managers, researchers either.
Yeah, and I think that one of the questions that popped in is about a job share, and actually the rules of Parliament don't currently allow it. And even, you know, if a member of Parliament is pregnant and needs to take maternity leave, you know, it falls on that team that you're talking about who really kind of push forward and
then it's that balance, Lauren, because I'm also conscious that I'm not an employee. I'm accountable only to my constituents. In some respects, that means that I feel sometimes guilty if I've taken a little bit of time off for my family. But on the other hand, I get paid when I'm off sick. I would get paid if, you know, I'm in receipt of my salary. So I'm very conscious as well that in some respects we are incredibly fortunate, and frankly, sort of complaining about our life as an MP isn't going to win us any fans.
Yeah, we're in a really good space to kind of open up to the panel session with Amy kind of chipping in, which is fantastic. Just before we do that, Wendy, I just want to kind of ask you about your Chief Whip role, because it's something that, depending on what party you're in, you become elected as an MP, and then you're also given, you're asked to kind of take on other responsibilities. Sometimes you might be appointed by your party and become a government minister. But the Chief Whip role is an interesting one, and I wonder whether you can just kind of describe that in a bit more detail and what it means to be one for your party.
So Chief Whip is probably one of the most misunderstood roles in Parliament, and I think not helped by some of the legacy of older programmes like House of Cards, that it's seen as sort of, you know, nefarious dealings, and I joked about my big stick. But reality is at the very basic level, it's to ensure that your MPs vote in line with the leaders' wishes. But the reality is it's much, much bigger than that. So I used to be a police officer, and then I worked in HR for a period. So in some ways, I think I can see how it came together that I was a person that would potentially be good at this role. But it is very hard. It's about building relationships, ensuring that you have good relationships amongst your parliamentary colleagues, who ultimately, it isn't a normal organisation. You're part of a team, but, you know, the leader of my party isn't my manager. And so it's all about relationship building, and it's also about building relationships on a cross party. So I will be in touch with Labour. I'll be meeting with the new Wendy, that's a whip tomorrow, because I see that the Conservatives have just announced their first female Chief Whip, who's also called Wendy. And so it is about the government's Chief Whip role is to make sure that the government's business progresses through Parliament smoothly. For me, it's to ensure that you know, our policies, our values are put forward from our party perspective. But it's at its heart, it's about relationships, and that's one of the reasons why COVID was quite difficult, because actually there's this programme Times Radio do called Political Frenemies, where they invite an MP on and they want an MP from another party who's their friend to talk about why they're friends, and then you know, the issues of the day. And I remember getting contact and saying, I'm not even friends yet with anybody in my own party, because I've hardly spent any time with them, and you're asking me to get another MP on from another party. And indeed, what I ended up doing was my best friend, I'm very proud to say, is the SNP Provost of Midlothian, and I got her to come on, and that was the first time they'd ever had a councillor on. So it was really good. But yeah, it's a challenging job, and don't get me wrong, sometimes when I get a text from a colleague that says, Wendy, I don't mean to complain, but, and I've got my sort of forehead on the desk, but at the end of the day, it is a rewarding role.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for leading the way in the Chief Whip's office. And good luck with those new relationships that you're talking about building too. So let's move into our kind of panel discussion. And we're really grateful to all of you who are continuing to put the questions in, and those of you who actually sent us questions in advance. Let's start by just one of the questions that was sent into us. So we have some people in our space tonight who are planning to stand at the next general election. And from our new Prime Minister's speech to the Conservative Party yesterday, there was very much an indication that would be 2024. And that's kind of less than 2 years away. And first question is, what's your top tip for becoming a candidate? If I can go to Amy first.
Just don't let there be any barriers in your place. Just believe in yourself. People don't always believe in you, so you need to believe in yourself and put yourself forward. I think that would be my kind of biggest tip.
Yeah, and it's that don't doubt yourself, isn't it? And I keep saying, one of the things from electors, if you care about this, you're already qualified. If you care enough to be here tonight and to be thinking about this, go for it, and we'll help you along the way as well. But believe in yourself is definitely.
We should all be about smashing barriers, and it's like the night that I got elected, I just kept thinking if like a younger me could see me just now, like how amazing that would be. And I think about that all the time, to be honest with you. Just like, wow, sometimes you need to pinch yourself when you're in this place. Sometimes I need to pinch myself and hold myself back from getting annoyed, actually, because, and I don't know if you have this problem as well, Wendy. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or because I'm younger or because I'm blonde. I don't know what it is. But quite often when I'm in an MP only area in Westminster, I get stopped and asked why I'm here or told to leave. Which is interesting because our passes have like stripes on them, which means that we're an elected member. So people should look at that, but they don't. So last night I was on the terrace in the member like only section and got asked to leave. And I was like, I'm here quite often, so I don't know why you're asking me this, but it happens all the time. So yeah, stand up for yourself, be self-assured. Don't let anyone tell you can't be somewhere unless you actually shouldn't be there.
Absolutely. Don't wait as well. Go for it. And when you're in those spaces, challenge that bias. Absolutely. For sure. Wendy, what tips do you have?
Mine's another simple one, which is ask for help. I think we're really bad for sort of helping other people, but not actually thinking about what our needs are. Make a list of people in your life and ask them for help. I know I've got a friend, Hina Bakari, who is in the Greater London Assembly, and she basically made a list of all her family and friends, created this WhatsApp group and said, look, this is what I want to do, this is what I think I can achieve, but I know that I can't do it alone. These are the things I'm going to need help with. And, that absolutely helped. I mean, I couldn't do what I do. So my husband's a member of the SNP. He's supporter of another political party. I could not be doing what I'm doing without him. And I've had to overcome some of the mum guilt, in terms of that I'm not there. But frankly, if we believe in this equality thing, and we're all here, and I think, the fact that we're all here is testament to the fact that we do. And my son having his dad at his parents' night is just as important as me being there. And so, yeah, and it does mean that potentially I still do the bathrooms when I get home at the weekend because he just doesn't do them the way that I do them, and I get annoyed with that. But Frank, he is he's brilliant, and I could, and so it is, no matter whether you're in a relationship or not, ask for help, because it's not just in terms of the practical help that you need, but it's also that emotional help and support, because there are good days and bad days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'm also in a household where I'm a member of the Scottish Conservatives and my husband's a member of the SNP. It works. It can work. It's about those differing, challenging opinions as well. I still struggle to get him to clean the bathroom to the quality I would like as well.
and I'm a dog mum, not an actual mum. And I feel the guilt, so I can't imagine what your guilt's like, Wendy. I definitely sympathise in that situation. My dog doesn't either, is all over me when I get home or doesn't look at me.
Yeah,
it's one of the two. I know you've got one as well, like you said.
It's again a question to you both. Is there anything that you've done in kind of small ways or big ones to kind of progress gender equality since you've been elected? Maybe it's every day. It's just being present. It's being seen. I can see you both pondering.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. I'm the first female MP for my seat, which is a bit mad when you think about it. I'm the first female chief whip for my party as well. So sometimes it's just, and those don't, yeah, and sometimes I think you need to take a bit of ownership and sort of say, you know, that just didn't happen to me. Like I did that, and take a bit of pride in it. I think there's definitely a bit of that. And then, you know, when I think about things I've done, the thing I'm probably most proud of in terms of Parliament process, procedure, etc., is Owen Patterson last year, who was the Conservative MP who ended up resigning. When the government had tried to implement a motion that would have saved him from censure, I put in an emergency debate application and was granted one on standards. And yeah, that did feel like, I mean, we put that I was a former police officer on a lot of my leaflets, but I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be sort of taking that role into Parliament as well. But, you know, I think the trust in politicians, you know, it's at a record low, isn't it? So we have to all be responsible for improving our lot.
And trust is the very first thing that we have to build for everything else to kind of be successful and land as well, I think. I've got a question for you, Amy, from Scarlett, who is the founder of Smart Girl Tribe. She's also an author and a TV commentator too, and she'd like to know if there's anything that you miss about your life before you became an MP. She loves her job, she's very involved in politics, but she's worried about, you know, missing her current work and figuring out when was the right time to make that leap.
That one's so easy for me. So in my role just before I was elected, I was the office manager to a member of the Scottish Parliament, which involved quite a lot of casework. And I used to love getting into the real nitty gritty of like wee Agnes's garden fence that had fallen down. And too often I think we get caught up in the bigger things in this job now, and don't actually have the time to sit and actually, or maybe start off a case but don't have the time to take it the whole way through the way I maybe would have done in my previous role. So that's probably something I maybe would have moaned at it at the time. If I went home and told my partner about that, he'd be like, oh my God, are you actually being serious? But that's something I genuinely do miss, is taking something from start to finish and actually getting a really good outcome, mainly on the small things for people, because they're the ones that are so grateful when you can actually just get something resolved for them that means a lot to them.
Yeah. Ailey would be interested to know if there are any women or people who have more of a part-time schedule in politics, and as a disabled person, one of the barriers for her is how full the schedule would be. Is that something either of you have come across in terms of the kind of
your
schedule?
Constituency schedule is yours to make for yourself. You can do as little or as much as you want to do. There's no, well, certainly I don't know about you, Wendy, but there's no obligation to do as much as you possibly can. Like over summer recess, people do a small amount and they maybe go on holiday, or they maybe take some time for themselves. This summer I spent every single day working in my constituency, and I had the best summer recess I possibly could have had. It was amazing. I feel like I came home each day grinning from ear to ear, because I just met so many amazing people and so many amazing organisations, and it's what being an MP is all about for me. But that doesn't need to be every single day. You could kind of tailor it to suit your needs.
Yeah, I suppose I think that the issue is always going to be from a Westminster perspective, or particularly given the voting system that we have, that your party is going to need you to be in Parliament for votes. And traditionally votes are happening on a Monday, Tuesday, and usually a Wednesday as well. So Thursday is really the only day where we don't have votes, but that can change depending on the business. I suppose, you know, and councillor roles are obviously supposed to be part-time, but actually it's very easy for them to become more than that. And I think that's why we end up, dare I say, with a real lack of diversity in councils, because we end up, one, that it's a part-time salary that doesn't really pay enough for what the job is, but second of all, that actually you need to be able to you can very easily end up doing more than they should. But I think what I would say is, in terms of, there are lots of different ways to get involved in politics. For some people it is, you know, looking at what Amy and I are doing now. But you know, you get, I know my 2 caseworkers, and one who started off working part-time for me, and I've got a part-time constituency assistant as well, absolutely love their job. And well, I hope, well, they say they do to me, but you know, that is, that they are having the same impact on people's lives. And in fact, they are doing a lot of what Amy described in her role previously as caseworker, of really delivering on those small things for people.
And that you know, that there are lots of jobs in politics, you know, behind the scenes, special advisors, policy makers, caseworkers, campaign managers. There's so much variety, and part of our job is to try and get that sort of information out there. And Amy and Anum obviously did take roles with parliamentarians in the past, and Anum's actually advertising for a junior and a senior caseworker right now. That could well be a pathway for someone in terms of getting
I think there's a lot more roles advertised now that are open to flexible working.
Absolutely, especially in that sort of digital space and campaign management as well. Certainly, there certainly is. Just thinking about voting and votes, Tara's asking about, perhaps directed to you, Wendy, do MPs feel bullied by the whip if they don't want to vote in line with the leader? What happens if they have a valid reason to vote against? That's to both of you, but let's start with Wendy.
Yeah, so it depends on what the line is. So you may have heard of this terminology of 3-line whip, 2-line whip, 1-line whip. So a 3-line whip is the only time where an MP would absolutely be expected to vote in line with the leader, must be there. In terms of a 2-line or 1-line, it would obviously, we wouldn't want them to vote in the opposite direction from the party line, but an abstention would potentially be acceptable. I probably would use the sort of trickiest time I've had as a whip is actually the Brexit vote at the end of 2020. And the reason for that, I think, was one, because the building those relationships hadn't happened. But second of all, in terms of Brexit, obviously something everybody knows about, but for the Liberal Democrats, our position very anti-Brexit. But where we had ended up with in relation to the deal that was on the table, you could actually argue sort of 3 different ways. Do you support the deal because you think it's better than no deal? Do you abstain because you don't want no deal, but you don't want to accept the government's deal? Or do you vote against because you're so fundamentally opposed that you can't support? And indeed, that's where Amy and I's parties ended up, that we did vote against the deal. But actually, given that you can make that argument, you can make an argument on all 3 of those, getting everybody into the same place is quite difficult. But again, I would say it's back to conversations and relationships. And I certainly, you know, I'm not saying that those behaviours haven't historically happened in the past, and it's not limited to one particular party. But, you know, I'm very firmly of the believer, a believer that you don't build good relationships if how you are implementing policy is through threats.
So that's the whipped line. Amy, yeah, what do you think?
I would just feed into that and basically agree with Wendy, but just add to it, it's about having the conversations. If your whips tell you you're voting a certain way and you don't agree with it, that's not particularly helpful. I think it's about having the conversations in as much advance as possible, and making sure. But obviously, if you're part of a political party, you're more inclined to agree with the stance of your party anyway. But naturally, that doesn't happen all the time. So I think if we're having these discussions, and that's why your party meets, or your parliamentary group meets weekly, to have these discussions about the upcoming business, to make sure that we're all on the same page, or at least most of us are, going into the week's votes ahead.
Yeah. And I see it says, is it not confidential when doing your vote? Well, no, because in Westminster, you're walking into a voting lobby, yea or nay. So it's quite clear if you're going to be voting differently from what you've been advised. And indeed, for the bigger parties, there is a whip stationed outside the lobby door as you walk in.
And that's actually another point to pick up on just now. So when I first came back to Westminster, I had to walk through the voting lobbies, but there's now a procedure which they've allowed me to take part in, which is called nodding through, which allows me to have to be present on the parliamentary estate for a vote, So whenever a vote occurs, I'm in my office. I need to be seen and be visible by a government whip just before a vote. And they can come and check on me in my office, like during the course of a vote, to ensure that I'm present here. But it means that I don't need to do the walk through the voting lobby, which is maybe not as progressive as I would like it to be, given I need to do a 420-mile trip down here, but it's slightly more helpful in that it doesn't add to the exhaustion when I'm actually here.
I mean, this is all really helpful insight. It's exactly these kind of questions that just haven't been asked before, and we're just trying to figure it out. So that's, you actually physically walk through a yes and a no area, and new terminology for us about nodding through. So you have to be present in your office, Amy, for someone to come and see you, proof that you're there, to then cast your vote in the House of Commons.
The problem with nodding through is that it can break down, as we've seen this previously. So whilst I've been relying on it for a while and it's been incredibly helpful, it can break down, and it's dependent on the government and how sort of willing they are on each given day.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating though, Amy and Lauren, and I mean, Amy, I'm just getting angry just thinking about it. But when I think about my last employer, global drinks manufacturer, everything was taken from the, you were thinking about what you could do to help people, as opposed to, and thinking ahead of what the challenges might be, as opposed to being presented with somebody with a particular issue and then grudgingly accommodating it. We need to get so much better.
This is the point I keep trying to make to them, Wendy, is that it's me today, but it could be anyone tomorrow. And I don't want the next Amy Callaghan that comes along to have to face these challenges. I want there to be a clear path ahead for people to be able to stand and to be elected to this place and not have to face these challenges.
Yeah, and that's really kind of full circle back to kind of what's motivated you to get into politics, as well as to speak for people and listen to them and amplify their voice in the corridors of power. So just before we wrap up, just final question really, what's the funniest thing that's happened to you since you've been elected? On the spot, if you can tell us.
So mine was just a few weeks ago. It was the night that Javid and Sunak resigned. So the week that Johnson stopped being, or resigned as Prime Minister. And I was down to do a couple of pieces of media in relation to Chris Pincher, who was the government whip that eventually brought the Johnson Prime Ministership down. And I went into Sky News and was getting my makeup done, and I haven't had my makeup done for ages. In fact, I think it was pre-COVID. So the lady's doing my face, and the next thing, Jacob Rees-Mogg is brought in, because he's clearly been sent out by Downing Street to kind of shore up Boris. And he's quite tall, and so the producer, obviously he was getting pushed in first, so the producer comes in and says, "Oh, Mary, can you get Jacob's makeup done? He just needs some powder on his nose." And bizarrely, rather than sit in the chair next to me, Jacob Rees-Mogg proceeded to get down on his knees beside me while this woman thingied his nose. And I just remember turning around and going, "This is really weird, really weird." So there you go. That's my story.
Amy, try and top that.
Oh, I definitely can't top that one. That's incredible. So after my second ever PMQs, so 2 weeks after being elected, it tends to be that a lot of MPs head to the tea room after PMQs, which is obviously to get lunch, just the nature of the timing of it. And I thought I was standing next to my chief whip, Owen Thompson, and it turns out I wasn't. Turns out I was standing next to Boris Johnson. I know. And I was like, "Oh, are you going to get the mac and cheese? I'm going to get the mac and cheese. I love mac and cheese." And started going on and on and on about mac and cheese. And then I just hear this big booming voice go, "Oh no, I'm going to get the tomato soup today." And I'm like, "Owen, what is going on here?" And it was Boris. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, what is going on?" So he doesn't like mac and cheese, it seems.
Okay, I'm looking forward to calling Owen Boris next time I see him.
Yeah. So I love telling, whenever I do a school visit, I love telling little primary school kids about that, because they find it so funny that he never got mac and cheese on mac and cheese day, because that's apparently the second best day in the dinner school after fish and chip day.
I mean, who doesn't love macaroni and cheese? Thank you so much, Wendy Chamberlain, Amy Callaghan, and to Anum Qaisar, who's left us now. But I mean, just we've covered a lot of ground. All of the women in this space, including our British Sign Language interpreters, Teresa and Kate and Maggie and Hannah from Elect Her, it's a club and a community, and we continue to grow it in huge numbers because women are actively wanting to become more involved in politics. So thank you both so much for joining us. To everyone else, yes, please show your appreciation for Amy and Wendy and everyone else in the community who's supporting each other and you'll go on to network with. Please check out our resources on the Elect Her website. There are many. And if you are on Instagram, the LinkedIn tree is fantastic for all that sort of extraness in terms of Facebook, LinkedIn, workshops, gatherings. There's so much going on in this space. I'm so proud of what Elect Her are doing for Scottish women as well. Thank you so much, everyone, and good night.